together, coming up short and giving up never. We've it together. Come along, come along, come along, come along. Mending it together. A world on fire can't last forever. We're gonna mend it together. A stitch in time is gonna save nine. A stitch in time is gonna save nine. And I wanna be a catalyst for change. Trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game. 'Cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be. Dreaming together. Some say hope is a thing with feathers. We're gonna dream together. It sings a song, never stops at all. It sings a song, never stops at all. And I wanna be a catalyst for change. Trying something different. I wanna change the rules of the game. 'Cause even the smallest bird can fly up to the top of the tree. And I wanna be a catalyst and find out what could be.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. This year's Catalyzing Change Week is about solutions from the front lines by social innovators.
In 2022, Catalyst 2030 concentrated its efforts on bringing proximate leaders and frontline solutions to the forefront. Collaborations led by members from the Global South produced groundbreaking reports on climate and transforming education, with an emphasis on offering local solutions. We continued our mission to create an enabling environment for social entrepreneurs to flourish by initiating a letter to donors, signed by more than 1,200 social entrepreneurs and innovators. The Catalyst 2030 awards ceremony was spectacular, and the awards themselves welcomed by the private sector, governments, bio multilaterals and donors.
Catalyst 2030 as a movement is disruptive.
One of the best things I think that's come out of Catalyst 2030 so far is incredible collaboration across the ecosystem that just didn't exist before Catalyst came into being.
The thing I love most about Catalyst is that it's an open movement for social entrepreneurs around the world.
I'd encourage anyone who's looking to be more connected with their local communities around social development goals to come along to Catalyzing Change Week.
Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week.
Indeed, welcome everyone to this session of Catalyzing Change Week. You will have just seen flashed on the screen the instructions if you need translation into non-English languages. This session will be in English. My name is Dan Biederman. I'm a proud Catalyst member, chair of the private sector working group, which within Catalyst has sought to create intersections between social enterprises, social entrepreneurs, and the private sector and identify the mutual value that can emerge. In my day job, I do impact venture capital at the Working Capital Fund, looking to support multinationals to come into greater engagement with respect for human rights and global supply chains. So the topic today is how to support the private sector to do good I would say sort of a mutuality to it that maybe isn't reflected entirely in the title. But as someone who's worked in this space for a while, like many of you, it's clear that there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding, mutual misunderstanding. Social enterprises, social entrepreneurs don't always have a full picture as to what they might gain from engagement with the private sector. And likewise, people in the private sector also don't really have a full picture of what they can gain by working with the social enterprise and social entrepreneurship sectors. We explored this as Catalyst and the private sector working group in particular in 2021 in a report entitled Catalyzing Collaboration, still on the website, still worth reading, done mostly by the global consultancy Resonance. And it articulated the untapped value that emerges and can emerge for companies, and then obviously also for the social enterprises and social entrepreneurs that they work with. It's worth checking out. And it describes how both value chain partnerships and strategic sponsorships can emerge from greater collaboration between social enterprises and the private sector. Today's panel is really, quite frankly, amazing, both in its breadth and its depth of experience. We want to hear from them the stories that they have about how they have worked at the intersection that I've been describing so far. We have with us Ajay Khanna, who is the Global Group Strategic Advisor and Group Global Ombudsperson of the Jubilant Bhartiya Group, which has 4 publicly listed companies on Indian stock exchanges in food and pharmaceuticals and other sectors. And he himself has been closely involved with the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award in India for 14 years. So a close friend and someone who knows the SE side of the space as well as the business side. We welcome another friend, Alexander Vanderplof of SAP, who is head of corporate social responsibility there, and in her role finding the strategic business value at the intersection of sustainable social impact and the core business that SAP runs. Also responsible for corporate giving, volunteerism, and the development of multi-stakeholder partnerships. In addition, we have Joanne Kellerman, who is chair of the second largest pension fund in the Netherlands, the acronym of PFZW, couldn't do it justice in Dutch, which is the pension fund for the care and welfare sectors in the Netherlands. She's also chair of the supervisory board of Aflatoon International, an NGO providing social skills education to children worldwide, and clearly in that role knows very well our chief facilitator, Jeru Bilamoria. And then 2 folks who seem to have collaborated with one another. First, Arnaud Moreau from Ashoka Europe, co-director of Ashoka Europe, an MBA and apparently a former Olympic wrestler, so says his bio, who's been mostly involved in the humanitarian sector, launched Ashoka in France, Belgium, and Switzerland, and is responsible for Ashoka's innovation for each businesses from his home in Switzerland, as depicted by his background. And then last but certainly not least, Simon Manyara, who is Senior Manager of Engagement and Collaboration, Sustainability and Culture at Boehringer Ingelheim, which is a 150-year-old research-driven biopharmaceutical company, which looks to create value through innovation in areas of high unmet medical need. In addition to other qualifications, he also has an MBA and is a former pharmacist, so capable individual. Welcome them all. You can see we have folks who are working in business, so folks who are working in the social sector, different kinds of businesses, and then someone whose primary job is allocating capital. I'm going to start by giving you a brief kind of context to a particular initiative that we at Catalyst have generated, including with some of you around the table, that seeks to focus attention on the value, the mutual value that can emerge into business and social enterprises. And it's known as the Catalyst Business Commitment. And it provides at least a kind of a core or a foundation or a foundational understanding approach that we can talk about more as we go forward. The Catalyst Business Commitment was launched at Davos this year, designed and managed in collaboration with all of the leading social enterprise support organizations, including, I'll name them, Bisocial USA, the Fair Trade Federation, Good Market, Moving Worlds, Social Enterprise World Forum, the Social Impact Movement, World Fair Trade Organization, and UNISP Social Business. So those of you who are partners with any of them can see their fingerprints on the Catalyst Business Commitment. And essentially what it is, it's a recognition, it's a badge that is given to private businesses which commit to one two or three, but at least one of the following very specific things in support of the social enterprise space. They either provide unrestricted systems change funding for a mission-locked social enterprise, or they provide pro bono or discounted services, much like those that are provided by tech and law firms to some social enterprises, or they commit to social procurement, where a business preferentially procures products and services from a mission-locked social enterprise, preferably with a percent of spend, as we've seen in some institutions. This is not completely a new thing, and it's already attracted some pretty well-known businesses, and I'll name them because we're grateful for their support and are eager to hear their stories. But current badge earners at the platinum level include eBay, EY, Lexmundi, Microsoft, and SAP. And at the silver level, Compass Diversified. So the Catalyst Business Commitment I introduce as an example of a way that businesses can come into engagement directly with social enterprises, and in a way, also the way in which social enterprises can specifically support businesses to achieve their goals. And that's the topic we're going to explore starting now with the panel in some more detail. Alexandra, I'm going to start with you as a business commitment member. I mean, in general, how does the private sector benefit by working with social enterprises, and what role did the business commitment play in the work that you're trying to support?
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Look, I think, very honestly, I don't think that the private sector has truly embraced yet what partnering with the social enterprise sector can really mean to them from a business value perspective. I think too often many private sector players are potentially still seeing it more as a CSR activity rather than as an integration into their business strategy. But the argument that we make and how we've been trying to position the whole topic within SAP is that, you know, as you're looking into building sustainability into your business strategy, as you're looking into building ESG into your business model, and as you're looking into not just complying to regulations and policies that are coming out in this space, but as you're looking into driving a true positive environmental and social impact, if you're doing all of that, then I think very quickly you start to notice that one of the key players you should be partnering with and should be working with is the social enterprise sector. Once you understand, who the social enterprises are, what makes them tick, and once you also understand that social enterprises don't just drive social impact, but very often drive a combination of environmental and social impact. You will not believe how often I have to explain that, that just because a social enterprise is called a social enterprise doesn't mean that they're exclusively driving social impact. So I think, while a lot of effort has been done and made to develop this business case of the social enterprise sector and the value that it brings to the private sector, I still think that it needs to be fleshed out a little bit more. And that potentially it also should be made industry specific, right? Where you're saying, you know what, if you're in the manufacturing industry, this is how you can and should partner with social enterprise, and here's how it drives value for you. This is just an idea that I keep coming back to, because sometimes we think of it more as a monolithic, entity, but it really isn't. The private sector is very diverse. And I think as such, we should also look at it in terms of concrete business value. We're looking at it primarily from two perspectives. One is through social procurement, and I think many of you who've heard me speak about this know this. We have made a very, very clear and strong commitment to this, because we believe that it creates a new market for social enterprises. And what it does from a business value perspective, it helps companies diversify their supply chains. It helps them to overcome disruption in supply chains that everybody is facing today. And it also helps to create more resilient and responsible supply chains, right? The whole topic of social procurement can link into those bigger topics that companies are really concerned about. And that is where you can, you can drive significant business value, both from a diversification of your procurement spend, but also looking at it in the wider context of building and driving responsible and resilient supply chains. So that's one way that we're looking at it. But I do think that you should also look at things a little bit more outside of the box, right? And we do that, for example, through pro bono consulting. And you might think, well, what's so special about pro bono consulting? But we did a 10-year study last year where we analyzed the pro bono consulting work that we have been doing over the past 10 years with social enterprises. And we realized that not only were we obviously providing value to the social enterprises themselves, but we were contributing pretty significantly to very important leadership development skills that we as a company need today to build the future leaders that we need as a sustainable and intelligent enterprise. So we're influencing skill and competency development, and we're contributing pretty significantly through pro bono consulting with social enterprises to a leadership culture that we as SAP need, who are taking sustainability seriously. So these are just some sort of two ways how we're looking at it. In terms of the business commitment, you know what it's like sometimes, right? You work on these topics and externally you get the recognition for it, but internally you don't because they just don't, people don't really get it. And for us, very honestly, this is a tremendous opportunity to internally demonstrate that we are driving significant change by working with social enterprises, and we're being recognized as such. So it's just, it helps communicating internally as well as externally. And the last thing that it also does, it just helps us form new connections, right? And new partnerships and develop new networks and ecosystems around this topic.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Alex. So concrete and such a good articulation. And you've been such a good evangelist for the value that emerges not in a sort of CSRE, meaning a superficial, sorry, that's not necessarily equating the two, but the value is not merely a kind of a look good one. It provides real strategic value to the company. Keep the roundtable going, and we'll turn next to Arnaud Moreau, who's from Ashoka. What, from your perspective, are the benefits of social entrepreneurs working in partnership with the private sector? I mean, how has Ashoka's Changemaker work taken this forward? And how are you looking to try and deepen the opportunities that the social entrepreneurs in your network experience?
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for this question. I think I will really build on what Alexandra just said. So originally, Ashoka as a global network of social entrepreneurs was approaching companies from, let's support our social entrepreneurs, and by working with corporations, very often large corporations. They can have access to capital, they can have access to skills and expertise, they can have access to procurement, opportunities, and we did that a lot. To be honest, not always very successfully, because bridging the gap and I would say the cultural gap sometimes between the corporate sector and the social sector was taking a lot of time and energy. And very often, if we were able to come to, let's say, a successful pilot locally, the tendency of the large corporation is to scale it up, right, and to replicate elsewhere. But the social entrepreneurs were not always able to follow, the same pace. So very often we are starting something locally that could not really grow internationally, and it was a constant struggle that we were facing. So it was remaining a bit too transactional in our opinion, right? And we were really seeing that there was probably more potential than just connecting them from a, let's say, a business perspective. And we basically came to this realization by engaging with this family-owned, pharma business called Boehringer Ingelheim, and I'm glad that Simon will talk about that in a few minutes. And this partnership was a true turning point in the way we were showing up and in the way we were creating bridges between social entrepreneurs and companies, because we decided to look at the value that social entrepreneurs could bring to corporations. And of course, it could be, becoming another class of suppliers. It could be really helping them to have access to their networks. But we decided to basically reorganize the way we were showing up by organizing that into basically three main pillars, right? The first one was about innovation and around innovation, because we realized that social entrepreneurs and social innovators are true innovators. And very often, large industries started as tiny social organizations. If you look at Couchsurfing was incepted before Airbnb, the mobile banking system M-Pesa in Kenya was incepted by Wizit in South Africa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a lot of basically business opportunities that social entrepreneurs are bringing, to the table, and sometimes maybe not the same way as regular businessmen would do, but still, what they do is extremely interesting, and social innovation is true innovation. So I would say the first premise was, let's really identify within our global network those social entrepreneurs that can be relevant on the last mile delivery distribution, for instance, or that can be relevant on other pain points that maybe the companies see, or maybe that could even open new opportunities down the road by really realizing and looking at the world totally differently. So the first pillar was truly about making sure that innovation could be seen, social innovation could be seen as real innovation. That was number one. Number two, linked to that, was how can we help the companies, and how can social entrepreneurs help employees, I would say, do this mindset shift, and really, I would say, wear another set of lenses and glasses to really look at the world differently. Alexandra just said it, working and engaging with social entrepreneurs is a fantastic opportunity to develop a new skill set, right? Because social entrepreneurs are efficient, agile, they are looking for the, let's say, the most efficient solutions most of the time. And very importantly, they look at the world in a very systemic way, right? And I think that, in the world of today, having this ability to understand, I would say, how those ecosystems are forming, how you need to engage with them, etc., is an important skill even within the business industry, right? And I agree that it should be industry specific, but we see that increasingly that working and engaging with social entrepreneurs is a two-way street, right? They can learn from corporate leaders and executives and managers, but equally those can really develop these skill sets. So I think Simon will touch upon, the different opportunities that we have created with BI in order to engage roughly 12,000 employees so far. But I think that it's definitely let's say a talent development program that you can really incept by creating those connections. But again, it requires that people feel like peers, right? And really understand that you're not just helping these tiny or poor social organizations that requires your expertise. You're basically engaging with a true entrepreneur, looking at the world in a different way. And the third pillar is a bit of I would say the result of combining the first two. When you bring together a new set of innovations and people who look at the world differently, then you start inventing new business models, right? You start looking at things in a totally different manner. And it takes time, obviously, because it requires that everyone feels comfortable and safe in co-creating these type of new opportunities. But this is fantastically exciting, because if you think of the billions of people who don't have access to healthcare or to water and sanitation, etc., we need market-based solutions to get there. But the traditional business models are not enough to get there. So you need to combine the expertise of both the social entrepreneurs and the corporations. So that's basically what we have been learning, I would say, from this 12 years journey with Boehringer Ingelheim. That is a constant, I would say, learning process. You never know when that's going to end, and we keep learning again and again. And we are now starting to, I would say, share the results of those learnings with other corporations, because we believe that we need more and more of those who are really ready to consider social entrepreneurs as true partners, in really bringing solutions to scale globally. And again, I would say the main learning for us was that this cultural transformation part is a key enabler of any sustainable strategy, right? If you can really bring, I would say, the two dimensions, so a very structured top-down framework on sustainability and social impact, enabled with the new mindset, of collaboration and a new skill set that is necessary to have impact, then I think it's a fantastic, I would say, combination to have big impact at big scale.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So interesting. We'll turn to Simon in just a sec, but so interesting to hear that both you, Arnaud, and Alex have talked about the culture aspect of it. Certainly we think about business as largely being driven by metrics, and of course it is, but change requires culture shifts and mindset shifts, and good that you've both brought that up. Simon, let's turn to you. Welcome. What opportunities have you yourself seen from the way in which your company has the way your company has benefited from the partnership with social enterprises? You, as someone who is leading sustainability within Boehringer, what are your perspectives on how it creates value for your business, and how would you like to see it develop?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dan. And yeah, I know already started to touch on some of the benefits that we've seen, but maybe what I could do is just take a little bit of a step back to frame, how our ambition around sustainability. So we have basically three pillars. One looking at more green, which are the environmental topics, more potential, which really look at our contribution to vulnerable communities, and also what we have for our employees in terms of how we can empower our own employees. And we have our more health pillar, which looks at how we provide health equity, right, and how we can provide accessible healthcare to populations. And for each of these commitments, for each of these pillars, we do have commitments, right? Like we would like to impact 50 million people in vulnerable populations to access care and to also empower the communities. And we see social entrepreneurs as key levers and key partners for us to be able to achieve these commitments. And it's been a lot of learning over the last 12 or so years, since 2010, when we started working with Ashoka, with social entrepreneurs. And along the way, we've been able to try to tweak the models that we engage with social entrepreneurs. We now call our social engagement continuum, where we work with social entrepreneurs, from a purely social engagement model, which sometimes is really more around grants and donations, towards more social business kind of approaches, where we have a business accelerator, and we also have an impact fund that tries to really provide catalytic funding to social entrepreneurs. And, having worked, on all these topics, at least from my perspective, we see three key areas in which, we derive benefit as an organization from engaging with social entrepreneurs. The first one really being around identifying needs within communities in a way that, with the scale and the breadth of our organization, we're just not able to get into the communities in the same way that the social entrepreneurs are able to access communities. And if I reflect on our partnership, with Ashoka, we have Making More Health Fellows, and some of them have really great ideas and great innovations, right? With some of them working on things, as innovative as working with visually impaired women to detect breast cancer. Yeah, so these are areas that we are not able to get into as an organization, but really working with social entrepreneurs, then we are able to work with communities in a way that is truly transformational. Another way is, being able to look for complementing offerings towards patients, right? As a healthcare company, we think in patient journeys, and if you look at how a patient moves across the journey, is they will start from screening to diagnosis to treatment to care to rehabilitation, and we can only provide as a company, right, value along certain specific areas of the patient journey, usually around treatment. But then now looking at things around screening and diagnosis and rehabilitation, working with social entrepreneurs has really enabled us to provide holistic care to patients, right? For example, with the business accelerator, we are really trying to find solutions around diagnosis for patients with diabetes, hypertension, trying to find solutions around screening and diagnosis. So at least from that perspective, then working with social enterprises that are, again, closer to the communities, we are able to find really innovative solutions and provide real value to patients, right? Beyond just the treatment. And the other part is, as the rest of the colleagues have alluded to, topics around culture. For us as a company, we are driven by 3 key behaviors, what we call agility, entrepreneurship, and accountability. And we are working with social entrepreneurs directly, right? Our employees are engaging with social entrepreneurs to try and develop these competencies. So it's a really win-win situation where we do provide technical capabilities, for instance, within our, within our executive in residence program. An employee could work with a social entrepreneur for a period of anything from a month to 6 months, depending on availability, and they will share their knowledge and expertise on certain topics, but at the same time working with the social entrepreneurs helps them to get really close to the needs that are on the ground. So we are generating the next, I think we are developing the next generation of leaders through this approach. And again, working with social entrepreneurs has really allowed us to have a diverse way of approaching this topic. So yeah, I'm not sure if you have a follow-up question now, but
well, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm intrigued that you've brought in this new aspect of value, which is the word consumer might be the wrong one, but you suggested that these collaborations actually are leading to benefits for your patients, which is a pretty core issue for a healthcare company. So and it's interesting to think about how and where these kinds of environmental and social engagements do lead to business benefit, and where they actually, in the case you described, lead to benefit for the real ultimate beneficiary or consumer of the product. So thank you for sharing that, Simon. It was wonderful. Continuing around, we'll go to Ajay next. From your perspective, sort of sitting near the top at an important leadership role within a very large and no doubt complex set of companies. I mean, how does your private sector institution, how does the private sector in general benefit? And is there a specific policy angle that in your perception drives this kind of engagement with the social sector?
Thank you, Dan. I'll try to add to what the other panelists have already spoken. My compliments to Jiru and her team for putting this session together, though I think there is an inherent presumption in the title of the session that private sector needs to do much more than what it is doing now, which is right. But I think in the Indian context, I can see a huge change now, the way private sector is looking at engaging with social economy. And I can tell you from my own experience of being involved with the social sector for the last 14 years, there are two sets of things happening. I think in the Indian context, in terms of value-driven business models of social entrepreneurs, we need to learn a lot. And I'm seeing that the trend in India, in terms of the way the corporate behavior is being watched now very carefully, and the way this whole ESG and this non-financial reporting is being, so there is a legal framework which is pushing private sector to do much more. And then there is a business side of collaboration with the social economy. So I'll try to cover both of these. In terms of, the government of India in 2013, way back almost 10 years ago, introduced a law, which I think enabled a lot what's happening in terms of collaboration between the government, the civil society, and the private sector. This was a law where the companies had to set aside X percentage of profit and contribute towards the CSR. And I think that really helped push this whole collaboration between social sector and the private sector. What I'm seeing is that the social sector has done a few things very quickly, but before that, if you sort of take a step back and see what are the problem statements for the social sector which we saw. So from the private sector point of view, we saw the social sector has problem of networks. Second, problem of credibility and verification. Third, funding, which is always a problem with linkages and funding. Fourth, capacity building. And the fifth was this whole advocacy. They probably need more platforms for advocacy. From the private sector point of view, we saw that there is a lot a private sector can learn, and especially from our group's point of view. We saw that the way social sector, social economy work on shoestring budget. We saw how they look at costs. So there's a lot of learnings for the bottom line, and a lot of learnings for the private sector also from the practices of the social economy. And the other overall point, we saw that this whole point of data on the social sector and what are the credible social innovators, that's another thing which was missing. So with that background, what did we do as the Bhartiya group, the Jubilant Bhartiya group? We started on an accident journey with the Schwab Foundation, and we partnered with them for the last 14 years. We run a program with them called the Social Entrepreneur of the Year Award for India. And over the last 14 years, we've showcased more than 1,500 social entrepreneurs. And the winner, of course, gets to go to Davos and so on. So that's just not the event. What we tried to do was to bring them to a larger audience where we get other corporates to come and see what the social sector and those social entrepreneurs are doing. And second, we did linkages within the social sector with connecting the social sector with each other. And of course, it also helped in terms of advocacy. We got the senior government ministers to come for these events. And the event became a platform. The platform became advocacy. And then it led to funding from the corporates and so on and so forth. So that is one part. The second part, what the group has done actively is to work at the various manufacturing sites all over the country in remote area. We've engaged with the social entrepreneurs in a very collaborative partnership manner. They can reach the bottom of the pyramid, which we can't reach. So we did several of that work. And third thing, on capacity building, we helped fund Stanford Business School Seed Foundation. They have a course in India, and we help social entrepreneurs in terms of financial help to be able to join this program. So our philosophy has been actively promote through advocacy and publicity, intervention on developments, and also to look at, of course, what others have said, the employee engagement and so on. So we work in the area of health, education, skills, livelihood, and we have deep engagement with social entrepreneurs on each of these areas. And this other thing we've done is, as a foundation of the group, we have linked with other corporate sector, other companies in India, and help them co-create programs with the social entrepreneurs. So I'll stop here, and this has been a great journey. And I have enjoyed working with the social entrepreneurs, and there's a lot to learn from them. Thank you.
Thank you for being so specific about the value and the ways in which you've sought as a company to fill gaps that you perceive. Love the evangelical work that you've done, trying to spread the word and find other partners. And also, I know the social entrepreneurs in the audience will be pleased that you raised the point about funding, right? Fundamentally, in small institutions, scrappy, small shoestring budget institutions need more money, and that's a vital piece to put on the table too. We'll come back to it's also in the questions about the question about laws and policies and the sort of balance between carrots and sticks, but let's hold that for the moment because we have one last but not least panelist. Joanne, thank you for being patient. We're all eager to hear, and it's somewhat unusual in sessions like this to hear from the perspective of someone whose job is essentially asset allocation and the management of money, and particularly the intersection of pension funds and social enterprises pension funds, which of course have long-term obligations to actual beneficiaries, and which are increasingly called on to do more in terms of support for social. So really eager to hear your perspective on how this lays out. I mean, what role, blankly asking, what role do pension funds play in encouraging the private sector to engage more with the social entrepreneurship sector? And from your perspective, does the Catalyst Business Commitment have a role to play?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan, and thank you for having me. And also thank you for pointing out, you're pointing out that I'm representing a bit of a strange animal in this panel. But as a matter of fact, I'm realizing that, pension funds are social enterprises. maybe avant la lettre, but absolutely have a social mission. And in that light, it is actually quite mind-blowing to think that until recently, most pension funds were just looking for financial returns without regard for any other forms of returns that are out there. And fortunately, this is changing. And I think, especially in the Netherlands, we're not the only pension fund that is changing this, has been changing this for over 2 decades, I would say. But we are currently looking at new policies where we trade a 2D approach, weighing risk and return against each other, into a 3D approach where we have risk, return, and impact as the factors that make us take our investment decisions. Now, on those investment decisions, and that's really, my angle here. Pension funds have, of course, so many choices and so many trade-offs and so many factors to factor in. So that I also think it's very good what AJ just pointed out, that sometimes it's also a matter of, not a matter of not wanting to partner, but just finding the right partner, and the transparency, navigating the social entrepreneur space is difficult if you're not part of it. Maybe even if you are part of it, but certainly, looking from the outside. And we haven't talked about that yet, but I suspect that the Catalyst business commitment could also play an important role. If in terms of, becoming a brand, in terms of recognition, and sort of having this, hey, I know you factor, that could really be very helpful. One way in which, one model that might be interesting to mention here on your question as to how can pension funds play a role in encouraging the private sector to embrace the engagement with the social sector. What we are currently doing in terms of our climate policy, and more in particular our fossil fuel policy, is that we come from an area where we've always been sort of talking and engaging companies and saying, well, you really need to do more of this and more of that. And we've sort of come back from that path, and we said that's not enough. So if we do engagement in this sector, we do smart engagement. So we set goals. We announce those goals. We're very transparent about those goals. We send letters to the companies that we invest in, and we basically told them 2 years ago, for instance, in the fossil fuel industry, we told them, if in 2 years from now you don't have a credible plan to meet the Paris goals, we will stop investing in you. And well, we're not at the end of the 2 years yet. But we've been true to our word. And I think that this type of methodology you will see more and more. So investors like pension funds being very clear about what they do and do not want to invest in. Well, as far as we are going, we have in our investment policy, as a bottom line, we have goals to how to limit the negative impact of our investments. In terms of impact on the Sustainable Development Goals, but we also have a very smart goal of investing 20% of our total assets in positive impact investments. And there, of course, is a space where social enterprises could play a very important role. And and then I'll stop. My last remark is, as far as my particular pension fund goes, where we are representing and taking care of the savings of all the mostly women working in healthcare and welfare in the Netherlands. We also think that investing in companies that are active in healthcare and welfare has the added benefit of, recognition, of showing people this is what we're doing with your money. And these are the types of companies that maybe in the same country, maybe in other countries, are doing the same work as you do, and trying to make people's lives better. Let me stop there. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I love the framing of, hey, the Catalyst Business Commitment can help anyone who doesn't know about it, and it's frankly confusing enough to those of us within the sector, just kind of have a quick point of reference and maybe just a sort of a shortcut. And you spoke about the inclusion of impact in your investment decision making. Needless to say, that's an extraordinarily complex space in and of itself, covering numerous issues. But grateful for your intervention. I guess I'd love to. There's a few questions. I'd love to ask, particularly those of you from the private sector, and maybe Joanne, I know it's a little bit of a weird fit to come back to you first, but what do social enterprises need to know about how to partner with the private sector? I'd love to hear that from Ajay and Alex. You've already started to answer it, and then Simon as well, if you'd be willing. More sort of a, from the business world, what does the SE space need to think about or frankly do differently? If there's quick thought that's come to mind from anyone. Joanne, I'll start with you in case you do have a thought.
Well, thank you for that question. I do think it's often a matter of being able to be found, being clear about what you have to offer and what you're doing, and more often than not, and very understandably, social enterprises are so dedicated to their mission that they sort of forget to be out there.
Useful. Alex, can I turn to you? You already answered this question, or a version of it, at least in the chat.
Yeah, I think what we see very often is that that maybe the pitch or the value proposition that the social innovator comes with, or the social enterprise comes with, isn't relevant or isn't made relevant to us, right? So it's just sort of like a generic pitch and a generic value proposition. And I think, the more you as a social innovator think about, who do I truly want and need to partner with, right? Is there a specific industry? And is there a specific business that can provide value to me, or that I can provide value to? So I think the more specific you are, the better. And to then really adapt your pitch and your value proposition to that. And that means doing a deep dive into the core business, unfortunately, of your potential partner, right? So you have to do a little bit of research to think through, so where can I provide value? And this is actually something that we provide a lot of pro bono consulting on for social enterprises.
Welcome.
Because we sometimes see, that you might, yes, what your value is, but typically you're pitching it to the social impact and or environmental impact that you're driving, right? And pitching that towards a private sector player is a very different ballgame. So thinking that through and is very important, I think.
That's really practically helpful. Thank you. Simon, let me come to you. From your perspective, you've been part of what sounds like a robust long-term partnership here. What is it that you would recommend to others who want to create such long-term, really value-driven partnerships with private sector companies?
So I like Alex has spoken to the pre-partnering phase, so I can tackle the partnering phase. I think one of the biggest learnings has been around mindsets and being able to accommodate the diversity of the approaches and mindsets, right? A lot of times, especially, and then it depends also at what level, right? So if, like with Ashoka, it's a large NGO with social entrepreneurs, then there are, there are startups. And I think sometimes this clash in terms of expectations, and it's things around decision making, right? So in the private world, sometimes it's a little bit slower, and there might be bureaucracies and hierarchies, whereas with startups it's a little bit faster. And sometimes it's frustrating on the other side where the pivoting is so fast, right? And as a corporation, you're used to sticking a little bit longer with an idea before you tweak it. So I think this is the one thing that both partners need to really be cognizant of and really be intentional about trying to make it work. Yeah.
Helpful. Ajay, maybe come to you. Same a version of the same question, right? What is it that the folks on the SE side need to know in order to be effective potential partners for you?
So I'm just going to add, because I think most of my fellow panelists have already said, but 9 out of 10 times I'm asked by the fellow private sector people, representative, is to give them a credible names or a list of credible social entrepreneurs for them to work with. And 9 out of 10 times I don't have the answer, because there is no, I mean, I need to be corrected by Jiru and others, there is no central repository of a database which has already seen, audited, vetted a set of enterprise in different verticals. So I think the starting point for is the data and how to reach. So right now it's all by word of mouth. But if there could be a way, if there is already one, I'd like to know in India. But if there could be a way of an agency or a repository which has vetted, audited background checks of a social entrepreneur, because that's what private sector is worried about, that who are they partnering with? So to that point of data and credibility, that's something which we all need to work together with these social entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. I mean, Arnaud, I had a different question that teed up for you, but I'd love you to respond to that one. I mean, Ashoka clearly is a global network of social entrepreneurs, as is Catalyst 2030. There are others out there. So feel free to respond to what you've heard, particularly that question of like the identification to facilitate partnerships. And then I have another question, which is also in the chat, which I was going to give you first crack at, which is, to what role does a sort of a legal requirement or a regulatory requirement play in helping to scale? Right? Someone asked that, and obviously businesses are mostly very good at responding and complying with the law. And so to the extent that there's a law, it would tend to drive partnerships. So that balance between sort of carrots and sticks is another interesting topic. I'll again give you a chance to give a first shot at, and then others, I'd love to hear your reactions as well.
Yeah, sure. On the last one, it's funny because we just conducted a survey with interviewing 60 CEOs in 3 countries and trying to understand why there was such a gap between the intention and the action. And it's true that a number of those are just expecting the regulation to push them to do stuff, right? So I think that's quite interesting. And of course, some regulations can be helpful in that regard, but it doesn't solve the problem of credibility of social entrepreneurs, access to the relevant social entrepreneurs. I would say how reliable they are in their ability to provide a service or products, at scale. So I think that this is some of those, resistance that we keep seeing very often. And I think sometimes, I think that, again, if you remain in this very transactional relationship, I'm buying from you, you're a service provider or product provider, then you're facing sometimes the challenges that Simon was describing and others, right? So I think that for me, one of the elements that are critical in forging and forming alliances with social entrepreneurs is, for what are you doing that, right? So if are you trying to answer a short-term needs, and to meet a short-term need, or are you trying to change the world? Sometimes there is a bit of a disconnect between the two. And what we have seen that works well is really defining a shared ambition from day one and taking really the time to say, okay, what is it that we collectively want to achieve? And what is it that we social entrepreneurs can bring to the table? And what is it that you, corporations are expected to put on the table as well? And how do we govern? Because we haven't spoken about the governance aspect of those partnerships, but I think they are equally important. And that, again, if you're just creating a client service provider relationship, it's quite vertical, it's based on KPIs, quality, etc. It's not the same way as saying we want to tackle or eradicate this problem, in the next 10 years by coming together. And I think that this is where, again, the definition of goals and ambitions and the distribution of roles is important. But again, we are coming back to the mindset shift that is required on both sides, I would say, equally on the social entrepreneur side, to stop seeing companies as big and as cash cows, right? And money providers, but as true partners in achieving their social impact goals as well.
I mean, other thoughts about that carrot stick question? What's gonna drive? I mean, you've all talked about your roles as evangelists for the efforts, and Alexander, you just put in the chat you said a useful resource, but a resource about an incredibly useful program, the Transform Hub, that's Unilever, Moving Worlds, and SAP. So we made a decent amount of progress. Obviously, we're having this conversation. There's a tremendous amount of work going on. There's Ashoka, there's all the Social Enterprise World Forum, Catalyst, all these other organizations have done, and yet the need to kind of scale. So for me, that's an ongoing question, right? Like, how are we going to take this to the next level? Obviously, much of what we've talked about today is that. What I guess let's look at it as last words. Hopefully mostly inspirational. Maybe I tended a little bit in the depressing, like we haven't gotten far enough yet. I don't want to leave it there, right? Because this is genuinely incredible progress to hear all of you talk about it. But how do we go from 7, 8 companies at the business commitment to 100, which is one thing we're trying to achieve? How do we go from the way in which Ajay, you so powerfully described the proselytizing effort of your group in trying to recruit others? What do we need to do next? What thoughts are top of mind in the last couple minutes? If anyone has, I can call on you, but hopefully you'll just speak up.
Let me attempt to sort of take it to a broader level. I think it's been an amazing experience personally, as I mentioned, working with these social entrepreneurs. And there's a lot for private sector to learn from their attitude, their practices. It's amazing learning for us. What we are trying to do in India, thanks to the Catalyst 2030, the Schwab Foundation, this year's India's G20 presidency, we have proposed and working very vigorously on creating a social entrepreneur 20, like a working group within G20. They have all kinds of groups, but the social economic group is missing. And there is, hope that in the B20 meetings this year in Delhi and in the G20 meeting, there would be some kind of a movement towards creating a social entrepreneur 20, which will then lead to an engagement group amongst the G20 countries. And I think this will showcase not only the issues which the social entrepreneurs are facing, but it also will give them a platform to interact with the businesses of G20. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. SE20. Other last sort of points or calls to action, ways in which we can move beyond where we are now and get greater value at this intersection that we talked about?
Maybe, what strikes me is that 20 years ago, when the digital revolution started, all companies suddenly looked at those digital startups saying, we need to learn from those very strange animals, fast growing, etc., etc. The new revolution is social, right? So let's do exactly the same, and let's look at social entrepreneurs as, again, enablers of the future of your company. I think that the moment you start seeing this differently, your expectations shift and your relationship with them will also be totally different in my view.
Wonderful. The future revolution is social. Yeah, Alexander, do you have something?
So I think two points from me. I think one is we have to create significantly more showcases in terms of how the private sector and social enterprises are working together. And think a little bit outside of the box as well, right? Not sort of go down our tried and tested routes, but really create a significant number of these different ways of how partnering is happening. And couple that as well with ensuring that we have showcases where the private sector understands that social enterprises can provide significant value to environmental sustainability issues that corporates are facing. And the reason why I'm saying that is that unfortunately, a lot of private sector players are at the moment focusing a little bit on this because they're having so much pressure on it, right? And they, I come from the private sector, so I think I'm allowed to say it. Sometimes private sector players have a tendency to look at things, in isolation of each other in simple terms. So they look at environment separate to social, and of course we all know that it's interconnected. But we need to show them that it's interconnected, right? And we need to show them that social enterprises do provide value to net zero goals that companies have, do provide value to circular economy issues that private sector players are facing, do provide value in providing solutions to disruptions in supply chains.
Perfect.
So I think this is super important. And my last point, and this is more towards the social enterprises and the social innovators, you know, do really consider the private sector as an important partner, because sometimes I still see a bit of hesitancy amongst social entrepreneurs as well, where they're going like, yeah, I don't know, you know, I'll partner with every sector, but not the private sector.
Yeah. Perfect.
But I try to overcome that hurdle as well, and it doesn't mean that you have to sell your soul
Right.
by doing so. There is value in creating those partnerships.
Perfect and wonderful last word. And so grateful, all of you, Joanne and Ajay and Arnaud and Simon and Alex and the translators and Paige and Matt in particular for setting this up. Really powerful session. We at Catalyst 2030 are trying to get 100 businesses to commit to the Catalyst Business Commitment by the end of the year. Great information on the website. Go have a look. Grateful to you all. Thank you to the listeners and to all of you for sharing. And I think that means we're signing off.
Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.
Thanks all.
Thank you very much. Really
Bye.
appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks a million. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan, for
Bye.
moderating it so well.
Bye.